So here we are zoomed way in on the artwork, and I want you to notice this dark edge right there that nearly surrounds the entire honeycomb. And so what we want to do is add a shadow that's being cast by this edge right here and soften up the dark stroke as well in order to create this final effect here. And we're going to do so using a combination of two additional dynamic effects, drop shadow and Gaussian blur. All right, so I've already selected my polygon, but if you haven't, all you have to do is press Control-A or Command-A on the Mac because it's the only path outline in this document. And then here inside the Appearance panel, go ahead and select the bottommost stroke, and you might as well twirl it open as well so that we can see the effects as we add them. Now drop down to the FX icon in the bottom left corner of the Appearance panel, click on it, and go up to Stylize this time, and choose Drop Shadow. And by the way, the stylize that we're looking for is not this one. There's two stylized submenus. One is associated with this bottom group of Photoshop effects, which are pixel-based effects, by the way. And the other is associated with this top group of Illustrator effects. So go ahead and choose Stylize and then choose Drop Shadow. And turn on the preview checkbox and you'll see that the shadow is going the wrong direction. It's coming down and to the right. We want it to come down and to the left. And to make that happen, you need to change the X offset value from positive to negative. And then notice things will move in the other direction. So what we've got here is a mode. You don't really need to worry about that. It's set to multiply by default. That's going to ensure that everything darkens as shadows do. So just leave that as is. You have an opacity value, which you can lower if you want softer shadows. But we want a nice dark shadow, so I'm going to take it up to 100% in order to produce this very dark effect here. We have an X offset value that's going to control how far things are moving either to the left, if it's a positive value, or to the right, if it's negative. I want it to go farther to the right, so I'm going to take that value down to -10. We have a Y offset value that's going to move things up if it's negative or down if it's positive. We do want the shadow to move down, of course, but farther down, so I'm going to take that value up to +10 points. And then we have a blur value, and that determines how soft the shadow is. I'm going to take it up to 10 points in order to produce this effect here. Now, notice, if you will, that things look pretty good in the dark areas, but the colors start to flatten out in the medium dark range. And that's because our color is set to black. Now, you can try darkness if you want, which is basically going to use whatever color it finds to darken the image, but we want more control. So go ahead and switch to color once again, and then click on the color swatch to bring up the color picker dialog box. And notice the CMYK values. They're all zeroed out except for K, which is set to 100%. So in other words, we're just darkening with black and nothing more. What we want to do is add in some of that rich brown that we dialed in the past. And that means a magenta value of 85% and a yellow value of 100%. Now, you're not going to see anything happen in the background until you click OK, but I want you to keep a sharp eye out as that happens. I'll click OK, and now watch these colors get more lively right in this area. And so they are much more saturated than they were before. All right, so having done that, I'll go ahead and click OK to accept that drop shadow. All right, now we still have a very sharp edge associated with this stroke. And the best way to blur it is using an effect called Gaussian blur. And you get to it by clicking on the FX icon once again. This time we're not going to go higher than the Photoshop effects. So this is a very well-known, in fact, Photoshop effect, which means it generates pixels, but it's not like you can see them because they're nice and blurry. And obviously you don't have to tend to the pixels the way you do inside Photoshop. It's still a vector-based effect. So go ahead and choose blur and then choose Gaussian blur. And now go ahead and turn on the preview checkbox so you can see what kind of difference it makes. And in fact, it makes a very big difference at 2 pixels, which is good enough for what we need. You may see it start at 1 pixel or something like that. Let's go ahead and make it 1 so we can see the difference here. So I'll go ahead and take that down to 1. That's a blur of 1. This is a blur of like 7, which makes it massively blurry. We don't need that much. So I'll just go ahead and set it as I had it in the first place at 2, and then go ahead and click OK to assign that change. And so to see the difference, all you have to do is turn the effect on and off. So I'll turn off the eye in front of Gaussian blur. That's the very sharp edge. And then if I turn it on, that is the softer edge that I think works much better inside of this artwork. Now notice, once again, where effects are concerned, you're seeing the first effect applied on top and the second effect applied on bottom, underneath. If you want, you can switch the order of the effects, so you can blur first and then assign the drop shadow second, which is going to look like this. So it's going to create a much bigger, darker shadow. And to see what that looks like, I'll go ahead and press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to zoom out. So this is a very dark shadow that's created by applying drop shadow after Gaussian blur. And the reason it's darker is because drop shadow has a softer edge to work with in the first place. Whereas if I drag drop shadow above Gaussian blur so that I'm applying it first to a sharp edge and then blurring that edge, I get a brighter shadow as we're seeing here. All right, I'll end things by pressing the F key a couple of times in order to switch to the full screen mode, and then I'll go ahead and zoom on in. And that, friends, is how you build a repeating honeycomb effect from a single polygon using a combination of fill and stroke attributes along with dynamic effects here inside Illustrator.